Good afternoon and welcome to the Poison Pen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for a terrific discussion on baseball. We're going to be talking baseball spring training with two people who've written books about it and very knowledgeable about it. And spring training here in Scottsdale, and both authors are very familiar with it, so we're going to get right into it. But before we talk about the books, we have Emily Nemens, who wrote a book called Cactus League, and that is the fictional account of spring training. And we have, she's also, by the way, an accomplished artist, right? And illustrator, a jazz musician, an editor, and a first-time novelist. This is her first book, she chose baseball. And for the rest of us slackers who don't have that kind of accomplishment, we have John Shea, who is a longtime award-winning baseball writer, who has been covering spring training since the Black Sox scandal. Is that true?
A little before that, when Ty Cobb played out here.
That's what the rumor was. And he's written a wonderful book about the great Willie Mays, who, if he isn't the best baseball player that ever walked the baseball field, he's in the top three. And it's titled 24 Life Stories and Lessons from the Shea Kid. And we were fortunate to have John with us last year when the book first came out. But before we discuss the books, I think we should get to know you a little bit and how you got into baseball, and in general, where did it come from? Emily?
Sure. I grew up in Seattle, watching the Mariners in the late 80s and early 90s. And my dad was a Yankees fan. He's from the Bronx and grew up walking distance from Yankee Stadium. And he arrived in Seattle around when the Mariners did. And my mother and my sister had no interest in going to the Kingdom. So it was me, my dad, and Ken Griffey Jr. And, I was 6 years old, his rookie season, and I just fell for baseball. I fell for the Mariners. I did not fall for the Kingdom. It was not a great place to watch baseball. I mean, it was great fun as a kid, but coming to Arizona, which we started doing, I guess in the earlier mid 90s, and seeing a weekend of spring training, figuring out how to see 4 games in 5 days, or including travel, and watching baseball outside, watching baseball in these small, intimate, friendly stadiums. I just fell in love. So I've been a baseball fan my whole life, and have been an Arizona fan for nearly as long.
And I see you also started this project when you were going for your master's degree.
Yeah. I lived on the East Coast for a while, and I was, sort of doing the New York rat race thing. Loved it, but I wasn't reading enough or reading enough. So at the end of my 20s, I decided to go back to grad school, and I got an MFA at Louisiana State University. And, the sports culture there also definitely fed into the Cactus League in sort of indirect ways. Watching just SEC football was an amazing experience. And I got to know the baseball team there pretty well, and some alum, and just watched a lot of really great collegiate baseball. So those two experiences and learning how to write my first novel all sort of converged in South Louisiana.
Very good. And John, how did you get into it?
Well, Emily followed a guy who wore 24 in a lousy stadium, and I guess I could say the same thing. Mays played at Candlestick Park. So I was around for the tail end of his career, and late 60s, early 70s. So that's what I recall. Maybe he was on the final leg, but in 1970, he was a heck of a ball player. He still led the league in on-base percentage and most walks, and stole 23 bases and 26 attempts. A man who's 40. Nowadays, those guys don't play, but that was Willie Mays. He had a lot of really good years, but so that was an influence going out there. I mean, like the Kingdom, for Emily, Candlestick Park, we didn't know any better. That was the place. That was the place to go. And
did you know to bring your coat at least?
Well, yeah, because you knew that at your house at 2 o'clock, it's 90 degrees, and people are saying, why are you bringing the parka? Because I'm going to Candlestick Park. And they say, okay, because it's now 45 or 50. It's just you cross the bridge and it's all over. But yeah, I mean, one thing led to another. And, the Giants and the A's. The Giants came first to the Bay Area, and the A's won all the time in the 70s. But, following the Giants in those years and going to San Diego for college, got out and worked at some smaller papers covering the Padres. So I covered Tony Gwynn and the 1984 Padres, who lost to Detroit in 5 games. And then in 1988, I returned to the Bay Area and worked on a number of papers. And then that's, I came back in 88, and you're talking, Willie Mays, who was suspended for no particular reason other than working at a casino and signing autographs and playing golf with clients, was out of the game until Peter Ueberroth came around in late 84, early 85. So Mays was back in the game. In 86, he rejoined the Giants in the front office, and I showed up in 88. And I listened to his every word. And from there, a relationship was born, fortunately. And I asked him about a book quite a while ago, and he agreed, saying he'd like to put it in schools. So we kind of went from there.
Okay. Well, Emily, like your father, I grew up in the Bronx also, but I was a Giant fan because of Willie Mays. 20 years before, John knew him in San Francisco, and I was 6, 7 years old, and he hit the major leagues, and that was it for me. Of course, when they left for San Francisco, it broke my heart and all of that. But anyway, and talking about, I just want to show both books before we can. This is the 24 with Willie Mays by John, and you showed Emily's before. I think this is upside down. No, that was right. Okay, Cactus League. It's backwards on the screen. Very confusing. Anyway. So Emily, you're a big baseball fan, and where did you start to research? The characters in the book are there, I believe, 9 or 10 different characters or situations. Where did you research to put them in this context of spring training?
Yeah, I really wanted to write about characters, about people and lived experiences, and not just there is, an all-star player, a star outfielder in the middle of the Cactus League, but I wanted to sort of build concentric circles around that star athlete, Jason Goodyear, and think about other experiences of spring training. So, I really love Elizabeth Strout and Olive Kittredge, and thinking about these sort of long and complicated but individual stories and how they can all fit together into one narrative was something that I think I started with that. So, I started thinking about Tammy, the divorcee who moves to Arizona to sort of start over and is hoping to have a good spring by meeting someone meaningful to her. I thought about Greg Carver, the pitcher who his career never quite lifted off before he had Tommy John. And so I had this set of characters that I knew I wanted to write about, and I sort of got their stories, the emotional story down first. And then in revision, I'd say like every 3 paragraphs, I was like, oh, I need to research that. So, I had a vague sense of Tommy John, but then I ended up just doing like a real deep dive into efficacy and the process for that surgery. The same with, Tammy is dating a property developer in Scottsdale. And so I had to go do a lot of research sort of about the last 15 or 20 years of development in Scottsdale and the building of the stadium. And so I feel like every page or two, there would just be a diversion to go do that research. And some of it was on the ground in Scottsdale for sure, but a lot of it was online. A lot of it was, reading journalism about what was going on in Arizona over the last 30 years.
In John's book, one of the paragraphs Willie has is titled "Life in Baseball aren't fair." And I think a lot of those characters in the book have that experience that life isn't fair. Your spring training is it's not a it's almost a ritual where um, there's expectation, there's hope, there's um, hype, all kinds of things for people, both for the players and for the fans and all of the people surrounding the game. But life isn't fair. It's a really meritocracy. I mean, you can do it or you can't, and the level that they're at is obviously very high. But it isn't fair, and they always strive to be as good as they could be, but there's always somebody better.
Yeah.
And they're just one play and one game away from what happened to Carver in your book.
Right. And, most baseball fiction is about, the shot heard around the world or some other World Series or end of season conflict, right? Who's going to win the game? Who's going to win the season? Who's winning the pennant? And in Spring, hope springs eternal. Everyone has this opportunity opening up before them. But also, every Thursday with cut day is a door closing for someone and losing that opportunity to really make their careers, change their lives. So I was really interested in sort of inverting the triangle of where a conflict is in baseball and seeing what would happen if I wrote about the spring rather than about October.
Okay. John, in your years of experience at the ballparks in spring training, how does those kind of expectations, and like she said, every Thursday is cut day. There are a few, like Mays and a handful of others, don't even worry about those kind of things. But for most of I think each team brings close to 100 players, or at least they used to in the standard spring training. And obviously some people know they're just on the beginning path, but your book has a phenom who signs for several $1 million and of course looks around and realizes he doesn't belong there. But how do the day-to-day player deal with that kind of pressure, actually, is what you'd have to say?
Well, they often knew when cut day was because it was usually the day before the meal money goes out. So you don't want to cut a guy on a Thursday when you gave him a full week's worth of meal money on a Tuesday. So to save a few bucks, they always do it, right before the meal money. But you're right. It's, for a lot of them, they know their destination. They know that they're going to start an A ball or double A or maybe even triple A. Or maybe they're on the fringe and they have an out in their contract saying, hey, if you don't want me, I'm walking to another team, or they hope for a trade. But you're right, the Willie Mazes of the world didn't have to worry about that. I remember Willie McCovey, the great teammate and first baseman, Hall of Famer himself, told me it was just a darn shame because we'd come in and try to work out. It took forever to get back in shape, and you'd use that time here in spring training for just that. And Willie would show up in midseason form. And McCovey just said everybody was ticked off about this. It's just not possible. But I asked Willie, I said, well, how did you get into shape? And he looked at me and says, well, I never got out of shape.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's some of that is just genetics. I mean, he was blessed with a wonderful body too.
Well, hard work.
Yes.
Behind the scenes, hard work. I mean, let's not forget that. I mean, he didn't just become a baseball player. I mean, a whole childhood and learning the hard way in the Negro leagues, where folks like, Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle didn't have to suffer, right?
Right.
Willie had to do a lot more. Imagine Mays versus Mickey. Mickey drank throughout his whole career. Imagine if Willie did that. I mean, there's certain things, an African-American at the time just couldn't get away with, and he lived life, in an exemplary fashion. So therefore, he always took the right road. And I mean, you could go down the list of great major league ball players. And who are they? Well, Ted Williams, yeah, great fighter pilot, wonderful. Nothing against Ted Williams, but one thing he never did was like tip his cap to the crowd to acknowledge the fans. Ty Cobb with the high spikes, and Babe Ruth just regretted not being a manager. Pete Rose, with the gambling issue. Barry Bonds, we know that those issues. You go on and down. Mantle with his alcoholism and all that. But you look at Mays and say, well, what did he do? That there's no police blotter, and there's nothing he did that really surfaced. You could say, well, he got suspended for gambling, and I went over that. What did he do? By today's standards, these guys do everything but wear the casino label on their cap.
Yeah, that's true. Well, another big difference between 50 years ago, spring training, even here, was segregated. Black players and white players didn't go to the same hotels, didn't go to the same restaurants. And that's a big difference. And in the book, there's a lot of back and forth between players. When I read it, I sensed a little animosity between players, the rookie with the big money, not performing, not helping the team. And that aspect is, like you said, a lot of them know where they belong or where their place is, but they're still trying to make the team, get that big check. Although I think for most of them, it's to make the team to begin with, to be a Major League Baseball player. And in fact, in this Sunday's paper here, there was a story about an outfielder who had made the Dodgers a few years ago, but injuries for the last couple of years decimated his career. Now he's back, and he's a 30-year-old player trying to hook up with whatever team he can. And you sense some of that angst even in some of the, like Craig Carver, who knows his career is over because of failed Tommy John surgery.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly am a hopeful person, but I'm also a realist. And I wanted to think about, how people support one another or struggle through these real challenges of, the expectation that you're going to be that, that you're going to come back from Tommy John and it doesn't work, or, one of the players that you were referring to is the best baseball player in New Jersey. He's drafted right out of high school, and he just face plants when he gets to Arizona. And I think he'll still have a great career, but this is a horrible year for him. And how does he just, recalibrate and still, try to be a part of this team, try to make a good first impression when everything, he's just miffing all the time and on the field, but also with his teammates, because I was doing research about how many players come, and at one point draft, I think I had 100 players, and I was talking to Sandy Alderson was an early reader for me, and he said, that's crazy. No one brings 100 players anymore. I was like, I know, but isn't that exciting that like the clubhouse will be that crowded and that many people will be buying? And so I think I left it in the upper 80s, but I notched it down a little bit. And so just, thinking about, all the ways that it can go right, but all the things that might go wrong too. And for some guys, it is just sort of like who has the winter weight and who needs to, get their swing back and get their pitch velocity. I think that's a really important part of spring training as well. And for fans, that first look and exclusive look at those players we love and being able to get closer to them. I wanted to think about that too.
Apropos of John, you have a sports writer in this book, unemployed, but a sports writer who goes into depth in talking about the geology of Arizona. How did that come up be part of this?
It came up, I was really interested in, as I said, I was reading a lot, sports literature, sports journalism. I was also reading a lot about place and thinking about place as a character, and writers like McPhee, like Mishner, sort of taking that bird's eye view, looking at a place not just in the present day or in the recent history, but thinking about sort of the larger context of even before human interaction and interference on the landscape, what was here. And because, you know, the inciting incident of the book is a new stadium rising from an empty plot of land, I really wanted to think about that landscape and what was there and how it's changed over, not just, you know, since the advent of the Cactus League, but over the last several epics, really. And just sort of putting the human scale in perspective felt important.
Yeah, those are well-written pieces.
Thank you. I mean, I'm a little bit scared to be talking to John about imagining a sports writer, but it was a very different voice than the rest of the book. And at one point it was on, you know, the butcher block, and I just couldn't let it go. And I really wanted to figure out how to keep this voice in there. And I realized, you know, he has this sort of omniscient view. He understands what's going on in this universe in a way that no one else does. And who does that in the sports universe? It's the sports writer. They understand how the world works in a way that fans don't, in a way that players can't necessarily see from their vantage. And that sort of clicked together for me, and I was able to find his voice.
Well, John, in that context, as a longtime sports writer, there are things you write about, things you know you don't write about, and where is that? The line gets crossed a lot today, and never was that way in the past. I think, like you said, Mickey Mantle drank forever, but sports fans didn't. Today, you know, if one of your characters walked into a casino, his picture would be flashing in every newspaper, magazine, TV show in the world. How do you develop, you know, what you write about versus what you know and you don't write about?
You know, it's all about trust. And first of all, Emily's talking about the out of work baseball writer. And when I read this so-called out of work baseball writer in every chapter, I'm thinking, this guy is so good, he should be working somewhere, or she would. But
right. Those are well-written pieces.
What newspaper would put this poor person out of work? I mean, it's just amazing stuff. Where do you draw the line? It's trust. And now the age of Twitter, I remember breaking in. I used to travel with the teams. I used to stay at the same hotels. So yeah, you would see things on the road that, you know, the trust factor you just wouldn't write about. But now in this era, you know, it seems people would tweet that. They would post it on Instagram or wherever. And so therefore, I think it was early 90s when they kind of cut the cord on that, which is fine. You know, it's probably better that you don't travel with the team or stay at their hotels. Obviously, my company pays for everything, but you don't want any favors. You don't want them to do you any favors because they would imagine that you owe them. And you don't want to owe them. You want to make sure you report, you know, the truth. And if, you know, their favors are exchanging, then is it easier to hide the truth? I don't know. But I guess you last long enough in this business because of trust. And if a player or manager or general manager or scout or whomever, you know, trusts you, that's really it's all about access and availability. And you know, nowadays we don't have that because we're not allowed into the clubhouses or on the field. And baseball is such a game of intimacy and romanticism and up close storytelling and things you don't maybe see in football or even basketball. But baseball, traditionally, for more than 100 years, it was about telling the stories behind the scenes, on the scenes, whatever it may be, about the characters. You know, Emily's talking about all the characters, and these are real life characters who all have a story to tell. And in the Willie Mays book 24, I'm listening to Emily talk about the characters, and I'm thinking, yeah, that's wonderful. And reading her book and coming down here so often, it's like these are real things that are happening. I said, this is real. This is not fiction, but it's obviously fiction. But with Willie, the characters start with his father, Willie Howard Mays Sr., and Piper Davis, his first manager and only manager with the Black Barons in Birmingham, and Monty Irvin, his first roommate with the Giants. He was 10 years older, but former Negro League legend himself took Willie under his wing. And Leo DeRocher, of course, who somehow those are two complete opposites, a young Willie Mays and an old, well-lived Leo. They were just perfect for each other. And the characters really make this story, because spending time with Willie for the book, and I spent more than 100 hours with him, interviewed more than 200 people for the book. So I guess my job is just putting it on a tee for Willie and letting him show up and hit it out of the park, and having everybody else from presidents to Hall of Famers to commissioners to managers supplement his storytelling. So it's almost like we're all three of us sitting at a bar and going through chapter and chapter, and then every page Willie would tell his side of what we're talking about, to kind of up the ante on the whole thing here. And that's the beauty of it. It's Willie's words, his genuine Willie words that you might not be able to use in a typical autobiography, because so many autobiographies you read say, oh, man, I know that guy didn't see, he doesn't know that date, he doesn't know that time. So it was my job to give the date and the time, and for Willie to give his opinion. And I thought he did it pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved it. I mean, I think like the radical trust, you were talking about trust between the team and the players and the journalists, but the stories he tells, and that you're able to sort of amplify and build the world around through research and dogged research. I can tell. I didn't realize 200 people though. That's a lot of interviews.
Yeah, you just mentioned that you're not allowed in the clubhouse anymore or on the field.
Yeah, so yesterday the Giants played at Scottsdale Stadium. And what did I do? I pretty much go hotel room to press box to hotel room to press box to hotel room, as opposed to last year before baseball shut down. I'm getting there at 8:30, 9 o'clock. I have access to the clubhouse. I can go up to any player, hang around at the batting cage, in the dugouts. But now, obviously, it's different tiers. The field people might be tier 1, the general manager, the trainer, the players, the staff. And then tier 2 might be, the scouts in the stands who can't get close to the player, but they're there. And tier 3, we're up high in the press box. So before this, I did interviews with, Giants players on Zoom. And, I've done A's players, and pretty much you have access to whomever the team puts on for you. But it's not like normal where you would decide who you speak with and you would decide which angle. I mean, they're very helpful. The PR staff bends over backwards these days to make it possible to have some kind of normalcy, but it's just not the same. But we do our best. We all have to adjust, right? Since a year ago, the three of us made incredible adjustments, and we're going to have to continue that.
So, but that's more related to COVID than formal policy for future.
Oh, it's all COVID.
Yeah. Okay. One of the.
I did write a little bit about this in the book, is sort of the hype machine around athletes. And I mean, I think Willie just really did, fly right, and didn't have any skeletons to unearth necessarily. But, in contemporary baseball, I think there's, a lot of coverage and a lot of protection and a lot of interfaces between athletes. And, as Twitter has amped up, so have a certain number of protections for athletes. And that's definitely something I wanted to think about and trouble with Jason. is, if that wall starts to crack, what happens, and what happens to him, what happens to the team, what happens to his shoe deal, all of that.
Yeah. One of the characters or groups of characters in the book, which has an important impact, are the women, the wives, the girlfriends, the hangers on. They come, some of them come to the spring training. It disrupts family life. I mean, they've got kids in school. This is only for 6 weeks, right in the middle of typically of the semester. They're dealing with high-priced players who have their own 6 weeks of what they have to do, regardless of family. But they're an important part of the story. They're an important part of the book, but they're a really important part of the story also for these players and for the team to deal with it.
Yeah. I wanted to write about women. I wanted to write about sort of how they fit into the ecosystem. I loved A League of Their Own. I liked that sort of improbable baseball show Pitch that was in a couple of years ago. There's another baseball book that came out last year called The Resistors, where this like 15-year-old girl has the best arm in America. But I wanted to write about how women exist in the baseball environment currently and realistically, and maybe a bit pessimistically, but just think about those dimensions of how vital they are as support to so many athletes and coaches and owners. And I think the Giants are changing that, right, with their coaching staff, but just giving these women agency and story and the capacity to shape their own narratives within the baseball season, but also being honest where, it's really still a man's world, of course, on the field, but, that whole families are moved around and impacted by the roster. And, even if you have a great contract and the challenge is not an economic one, it's still, I think, really hard to have to uproot your life and move when your husband gets traded, or not move and not be with your partner for 7 months of the year, right, between spring training and the season. And what does that feel like, and how do you build community when you're so sort of radically displaced?
Yeah, it is, I mean, a part of baseball that doesn't really get spoken of very often. And in a lot of cases, it's not economics, because of these guys are, I think, what is the average salary, John, now? 400,000 or 500,000 minimum?
Oh, no, the minimum is between 500,000 and 600,000. The average salary is more about $3 million.
Yeah, but I meant the minimum. Yeah.
4 million.
So for a lot of this, it's not really economics, but it is. I mean, one of the things I read in the book, and I don't know if this was something you made up or
I hope not.
but it was a what did you call it? I wrote it down. Let me see if I can find it. Professional sports matchmaking.
Oh, I made that up. I mean,
Oh,
I think it's probably.
I'm sorry. I thought that was directed to me. My bad.
No. Yeah, just the idea that sometimes I kind of imagine for baseball players who want to get into a committed relationship, they're busy guys. Having a dating service would probably be helpful. But I made that one up, Larry.
Okay, it could be true.
Could be true. I think so. Yeah.
Well, John, you obviously travel as much as the players do during the season. How does that impact you in your general life?
I was here a year ago, and if I flew home after baseball shut down, I would have reached 1 million miles on United.
Wow.
And I'm still one flight away from 1 million miles on United. So in other words, I drove here. I haven't been on a plane. since. But yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Larry. That's a whole lot of time not at home with my family, but
Right.
I've been have the opportunities I've had to, cover baseball. Shoot, I have no complaints. And this is a project of a lifetime that I just did with Willie Mays. I earlier wrote Ricky Henderson's autobiography. So I thought about this after the book came out with Willie, and I said, shoot, I was a biographer for Ricky Henderson, the greatest Oakland A ever, and Willie Mays, the greatest Giant ever. I said, who am I? Why am I here? Why am I so fortunate and lucky? And things just rolled my way, and I haven't stopped pinching myself, really.
Well, I think talent always rises, John. People know where the good ones are. So,
Yeah, it's good to get breaks. By the way, you mentioned the history of the Cactus League and also African Americans and racism in the same
right.
earlier. It was really the Cleveland Indians, right, who came first in 1946. And why did they came? Well, obviously Bill Veeck had a ranch out in Tucson that he wanted to be close to and, make baseball big in the springtime here. But as much as that was, they signed Larry Doby, and you couldn't train in the South with the first African-American baseball player in the American League. Mm-hmm. So the Giants followed, and obviously they had the most diverse clubhouse going eventually, in the late 50s, early 60s. But this was, and again, it was hard. There was a lot of racism here. It was hard. They couldn't stay at hotels. They couldn't eat at restaurants, but it wasn't as bad as the Deep South. So Horace Stoneham, even, Casa Grande, Horace Stoneham brought his team to Casa Grande, built up this resort and golf club, and made the pool look like a bat, and made the parking lot look like a glove, and the hotel look like a stadium. It was just wild, extravagant stuff. And it didn't last long, and it didn't become the next Scottsdale. But that's how much they kind of went out of the way to just create these environments for the ball players, because it was all encompassing. One-stop shopping. They had hotels, they had golf, they had baseball, they had workouts, they had nightlife, whatever you want. So, there's no more baseball in Casa Grande, at least in spring training. But it's nice all these teams are in the Valley, because I remember we used to go to Yuma and Tucson and all kinds of different places. It's all right now within an hour of each other.
Yeah, you wonder why. I mean, baseball obviously is a business, and even in the book you have one of the owners, part of the character in the book, who doesn't seem to be doing things for the benefit of the team, more personal. And you wonder, obviously there's money involved, but their money isn't necessarily the team. For a lot of them, it's just a sideline. So he can do whatever he wishes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be positive for the team, as long as it's for him. But in real life, even though it is a sideline, there are some owners who get very involved and some owners who don't. But when you wrote about it in the book, he to me anyway, he seemed that his own well-being and his needs superseded all else, not necessarily the product on the field.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we get emotional, right? I think, I don't know. I'm still smarting from, I'm a Mariners fan and still smarting from everything with, it's Kevin Mather, right? The president that just imploded.
Oh.
I think, sometimes people, are not, even if, scouts honor, they have the team's best interest in mind. I don't think, every human operates at their best all the time, and his emotions got the best of him. And I thought that was an important dimension to show is sometimes people do take things personally.
And yeah, I mean, traded away a relatively good player. And,
Right. They're veteran. He wasn't as good as Jason Goodyear, but he was a great outfielder, and a personal tiff got in the way of that.
yeah,
But that also speaks to, I think, I made up this team, the Los Angeles Lions, and for better or worse, their acquisition strategy, their strategies, sort of an overinvestment in one athlete, and really building the team around that player, and making everyone else fairly expendable. Just as I talk about it, you can probably tell that's not how I would build a baseball team, but you see that strategy. My stepdad's a Steelers fan, and just like really building a whole franchise around one quarterback or one MVP. Sometimes people do that, and what does that mean for the other 25 guys?
right. Well, there is their first women general manager now, I believe, with the Dodgers. Is that right? So do you think with all your experience, you might slip into a position like that?
Oh, I don't think so. It's with Kim, right? With
Yes.
with the Marlins.
Kim Eng from the Marlins, yeah.
No, I think that's so exciting. No, I don't think I'll go into front office work, but I will happily, quarterback from the couch and complain about decisions I don't agree with.
Okay.
Yeah, it's long overdue, and you had mentioned the Giants, Emily, with Alyssa Nacken, the
Right.
first female coach in the big leagues, and every day out here she spends half the day coaching first base. And
It's
last
so
year,
exciting to see her on the field. It's
it's amazing, and it's heartwarming. And talking to Brandon Crawford, their shortstop, he said, "This shouldn't be a story." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It should be normal. It's great you're doing the story, but," and he's right. He told me this last spring training, and then we went through the whole year. She was in the dugout, okay, and this year it's normal, so it's not a story. And over coaching first base, and there aren't 5 photographers, shadowing her, which is great, because a young girl's going to watch her on TV and said, "Okay, I could do that," and they'll see Kim Eng, in a suite above the stadium in Miami, and they'll say, "Oh, that's great. I can do that."
Right.
Because I came into the game where there was none of that. My roommate back in the 80s, Donna Balancia, she was like the part-time Padre beat writer. She and I worked together. And it's just awful stuff that you heard when she entered the clubhouse. I mean, now, sometimes it's 50-50, and it's normal, because these players grew up. That's the only clubhouse they know, with
Right.
men and women covering the game. So there's nothing abnormal about it. And it's wonderful how times have changed for the better, but man, we got a long way to go.
Right. Well, I've heard interviews with Cap just saying, I'm a feminist, and that's remarkable, just to have, not that I'm glad he's saying it and it shouldn't be news, but just, I think, even in the last decade, sort of how the conversation about women not having these like physiologically wild arms that they can suddenly throw 100-mile-per-hour fastballs, but just, their talent innate and hard work, and what they can bring to the team, even if it's not, physical expertise, but just professional expertise, is really, it's exciting that door is finally opening.
Well, a lot of teams now employ, or even the players employ, coaches, emotional coaches or personal coaches, to help them with I assume that the stress and the everyday anxiety that goes into playing a game.
Mental skills coaches, Larry.
Mental
Really?
skills. Yeah, okay.
I did not get any of those into the Cactus League.
Oh, that's really. I'm just trying to think if I missed any characters besides the old coach who starts off the book when his house is, somebody is squatting in his house.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I left anyone out of that. But I think I covered.
There's an organist. There's
Oh, right, the organist.
there's a concessions
Lady,
worker.
right, work.
Yeah, I really, I just the experience of going into a stadium. I wanted to think about who do you see as a fan, who do you not see, as a fan, as a player. Really thinking about, the stadium as an organism and all the different parts of that of that world.
Right. Well, the book ends with hope and positive note that things will get better. Which and is the second book now you're writing in any way also baseball related or?
No, I mean, I could write about baseball forever. I had the opportunity to write the Mariners chapter in the baseball prospectus, and that was a lot of fun and more sports writing than my fictional explorations. And so I'd love to write about baseball again, but I'm trying to use a little bit of a different muscle this time around. There's still some sports, but it's a different sport. So that's it's still early going though.
Yeah.
So hopefully I'll feel good about talking about it by next spring.
Well, this was a tough year for baseball. I wrote it down on where but some of the players that passed this year,
Yeah.
from Gibson and Aaron and Seaver and Necro, and I mean I don't know, maybe because I'm older I get impacted more, but you could have made an all-century team out of the people who passed this last season, and some of the all-time greats. Whitey Ford. So anyway, and how is Willie doing now? Is he?
So Whitey Ford was the oldest baseball player in the Hall of Fame. Tommy Lasorda was the oldest Hall of Famer, and now they're both gone. And
Right.
Now we have Willie, who's the oldest. He'll be 90 in May, just a couple of months away. He's doing great. In fact, he wanted to be here, and he's sorry he can't be here. He was here a year ago at this time and was in the clubhouse every single day before Giants home games at Scottsdale Stadium. So I actually called him on the way. I rented a car and drove down here, 11 hours from the Bay Area. And I called him on the way. I just wanted to make sure I touched bases with him to kind of reaffirm that there's really nothing to do down here for him, or if Barry Bonds wanted to visit, or Cepeda or Gaylord Perry, none of these guys, because they couldn't get in the clubhouse and they couldn't get on the field. It's not like the old days where, the pre-pandemic, where you just had the run of the place if you're Willie Mays. And it's unfortunate because he proudly takes the role to heart that he works for the team. He just doesn't want a paycheck. He wants to be there for the players and the manager and fans and the media. and that's how I got to know him well, because he was always in the clubhouse, and kids would come up and they'd be intimidated. They wouldn't speak to him for weeks or months. Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, Posey, all these guys tell me. But then you learn, hey, he's not going to come up to me. I got to go up to him. And if I want any advice, he's not going to knock on my door. I got to go knock on his door. And then once you do, you're you're golden. But he can't come here now. And hopefully, by late summer, he could start going out to the games, and maybe by September, the following spring, back in the clubhouse where, he thinks he belongs. He's a baseball guy. He used to say, hey, kid. And that really never changed. Baseball is just such a big part of his life. And he's waiting for the day that we have normalcy.
Well, if he comes back here, he definitely has to come, and we'll save up a supply of your books.
Yeah.
We can get them both signed.
You know what I love about this conversation is Emily is fiction, I'm writing nonfiction, but the characters, it's like the same thing. I'm hearing her speak. And by the way, I was nervous starting here because I said, oh my God, I'm in here with Emily. And and it's like we both write about this outfielder who's the best in the game.
Mhm.
And you know, the epitome of American culture, right? The baseball player, everyone gravitates, everyone overlaps his life, his career. And while you know, Jason Goodyear might have a 9-digit contract, Willie Mays topped out at $165,000. And that's why Horace Stoneham, the owner you were referencing, traded him to the Mets because he was making too much money.
Oh my goodness. How
Yeah,
things
those are $1970 though.
Yeah.
that's still, yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I don't have any other questions, so I don't know if Patrick, are you still here?
I am indeed.
Okay,
You want to show some of these great pictures?
sure.
All right. Let's see here. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Oh, this is me and Willie talking about the book, interviewing him. Brad Manjan, the great photographer in the Bay Area, really helped me, as did Kurt Aguilar on the editing side, put this together. I mean, just two co-MVPs in my land. But he took that shot. I was talking with him, and it was a great moment for Willie because he loves talking baseball, and so do I. And like I said, I just put it on a tee for him, and he's so descriptive. And you know what? It hit me during this that he never, ever, ever used a cliche. And I hear it all the time in clubhouses and on Zoom now from players, and you hear the same cliches over and over because it's like a stalling device or it's something to say if you don't have something to say. And Willie never, ever gave me a cliche. I don't think he knows what one is. And it's just all true, you know, through the heart and real. And it's like all his inner circle friends read the book and said, you captured his voice, because every word in there is what I've heard him say. And that was like the ultimate compliment.
Oh, that's Air Force One and Willie and
Definitely a less gray Barack Obama.
Yeah, they were heading to the All-Star game in St. Louis. And Brad Manjan is a friend of every photographer in the world, including Obama's personal photographer. So we had access to some unbelievable art. There's almost 100 pictures in this book.
Wow.
So there's no other Willie book with that many. It's not a picture book, but there's like 100 pictures in this book. And every one of Willie, you know, going back to childhood and playing in the Negro Leagues and on and on. Hey, can I ask Emily a question while you go through these?
Sure.
No, I just wanted to know about that transition from, I mean, you've done it all. I mean, your resume lasted 2 minutes while Larry went through it. And, you know, everything you do, and now the first novel that you've written, and you have another one coming. But what was that transition like? You know, Paris Review, all the background you have in art and architecture and editing and working with different writers, and now suddenly you're the one. And you've written a ton already, but maybe nothing like this.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big change. I'm really looking forward to it. You know, I was working 60 to 80 hours a week. Just every, you know, you think I have so much respect for a daily paper, but you know, the quarterly was a pretty, we were a real small staff, and it was a lot of work. And even before that, at the Southern Review, which is, you know, another storied literary quarterly, founded by Robert Penn Warren in the 30s, we were a staff of 2. And so I was always, you know, I love editing other writers and being a steward for their work. But, you know, the whole time I've been a writer, I've also been an editor. And to be frank, I've always put that work ahead of my own, because I take the responsibility really seriously. And so I just really wanted to see what it would feel like to put my work first and see, you know, can I write another book I'm really proud of? Can I write it more quickly? Because the Cactus League took 9 years. I would file, I would ship that quarterly and then, sort of go into a cave for a week if I was lucky and come out with a new chapter draft or an overhaul. I haven't taken a weekday off or a weekend off, in probably 4 or 5 years, just in terms of my weekends are my writing time now. So, it's a big step, and I still love the Paris Review and I wish them all the best, but I really wanted to see what would happen if I gave myself a little more space.
Wow.
You did a great job with the book. I mean, anybody interested in, first of all, just good writing, but from both books, but baseball, if you like it at all, I mean, have any interest. These are really 2 great books about baseball. And like you said, you both wrote about incredible outfielders.
Right.
Although Jason does have an unassisted triple play to his credit. Willie didn't do that. So.
Yeah, but I don't think Jason had 660 home runs. I mean, he's got a good bat, but
Yeah.
he's not the power hitter that
Right.
Willie Mays was.
No. Well, I don't think Willie Mays ever considered himself, like in today's world, a power hitter, because he always hit for average too. He was, well, he's just one of a kind, really.
Yeah, and 5'10", 180
Yeah.
was always what it said on the back of a baseball card when you're at 5'10", 180. I want to be 5'10", 180. And I started interviewing him and writing stories. And he said, "Hey, John," one time he said, "John, that was a good story today, but you made a mistake." And I said, "What was that, Willie?" He said, "I'm not 5'10", I'm 5'11". I said, "Oh, okay." So all those baseball cards were wrong. And so forever more, including in the book, he's 5'11". So if the man says he's 5'11", but it's cute because these days, if you're 5'11", they make you 6 feet or 6'1". They add an inch or two to make you a little bit.
Well, the cleats make him taller.
Yeah. And so he just wanted to be 5'11". He wanted to set the record straight. But you're right. He wasn't a power hitter, but he almost broke the home run record of all time. And maybe he wasn't the greatest hitter or the greatest base runner or the greatest outfielder, but he sure did everything great. And like he said, my dad always told me, be top 5 in everything. And indeed he was.
Yeah. To me, Willie Mays will always be joy. You could see it when he played. You could see it when he talked to him. I could see it off the field. He always just epitomized joy doing what he was doing.
And, Emily, you mentioned the 200 interviews. In my day job, if I put out 10 phone calls, I hope to get 5 back, 3 or 4. But when I say it's for a Willie Mays book, I'm batting 1,000. And that included President Clinton and President Bush and Hank Aaron, and everybody has a Willie Mays story. And it's just fascinating, Monty Irvin. And, when I first got into this, it might've been back in 05, 06, when he kind of agreed and I started doing the research. I wanted to talk to people like Alvin Dark, who was his teammate in New York and his manager in the 60s in San Francisco. And there were a lot of issues with Alvin over race because the Latin American players didn't really dig him because he told them not to speak Spanish in the clubhouse. You imagine that, the 3 Alou brothers not speaking Spanish in the clubhouse. And he told Orlando Cepeda and Marichal and some African Americans some things that he just. Anyway, I got his complete story and I brought it to Willie and Orlando and Felipe and these guys. And the beauty of this storytelling in a forum like this is not to just, like in the newspaper, you pick and choose little pieces, little sound bites, but it's to tell the complete story. Now, Alvin Dark, while considered a racist as a manager, years later, regretted what he did, regretted what he said, and at an old timers game between Giants and Dodgers, all the players from 62, many years later, they got together in Arizona here. And at the hotel, Alvin Dark went around to each Latin American player, each African American player he insulted. and apologized.
Hmm.
And Orlando Cepeda said that it was a wonderful thing. We all cried, and he basically said Alvin Dark did not want to bring that to his grave. He didn't want that in his heart when he died.
Hmm.
And I said all the sub stories of Willie Mays, and oftentimes Willie is the peacekeeper, the uniter. He's the one who brought Johnny Roseborough off the field when Marichal clubbed him with the bat at Candlestick Park. He's the one who brought peace to the '73 series when the Mets and Reds were playing, when they were throwing whiskey bottles at Pete Rose in left field. Mays went out there and told the fans to cool it, and they did. I mean, so often there are stories, mostly behind the scenes. He wasn't like Hank or especially Jackie, who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. and said things that were, wonderful and informative and important, and we live by what they say. But Willie didn't do that. He did everything behind the scenes because that's what his dad told him to do. He said, don't make too much of a scene, work with guys behind the scenes, but don't be out front. And Willie lived by that. And, to his credit, he stood by it forever. And, I guess that's to be honored because I spoke to so many next generation players like Joe Morgan and Willie McCovey and Reggie Jackson and Maury Wills and even Hank Aaron, who's 3 years younger. And they all gave me anecdotes and stories about how Willie influenced them, and including during the civil rights movement, and to do things the right way. And as an elder African-American ball player, they really looked up to him and kind of idolized him. And a lot of people didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's truly one of baseball and America's greatest. He really did. Patrick, are there any other questions at all?
No real questions.
Okay.
I think they're just this has been a wonderful conversation. I think they've all just been kicking back and enjoying it.
Okay. Well, the books are available here at Poison Pen. And if you would like to get one, just get online or give us a call. I really appreciated the time. Both just fantastic, really. Both of you were just great, and the books speak for themselves. They really are just wonderful.
Actually, I have a question for both of you. Can you tell us a little bit about your next projects? I'll start with Emily.
Yeah, I'm working on another novel. It's a little early to talk too much about it, but it's a little bit, like I said, I could write about baseball forever, but I'm writing more about art and contemporary art and using that part of my brain and that part of my background in this next book. So yeah, and doing some more illustration. I'm back to submitting cartoons to the New Yorker. So hopefully I'll get another cartoon in there soon.
Cool.
Very good.
It just hit me, Emily. Sorry for continuing this where you might want to shut it down, but I think you were a fan of the book, Pafko at the Wall.
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Yeah, and I'm a fan of the book A Day in the Bleachers. Arnold Hanno, who was there in his 30s, I think, and sitting in the bleachers and writing about the same thing, right? The same day, the same game.
Yeah.
It's where I don't know, fiction and nonfiction overlap. But I don't know why I mentioned it. I just thought of it. It's pretty cool that
it is. I learned so much from long form nonfiction and journalism that really is world building, whether it's Roger Angell or John McPhee, and he sometimes wrote about sports, more often not, but I think the intersection and the overlaps of certainly I'm writing from life experience and lived experience, but the possibilities of research and the generosity of telling someone else's story, which is what you did with 24 and what journalists do every day, it's so exciting and just something that I love to do. So the next book, like I said, I'm speaking a bit vaguely about it, but it will certainly continue to think about the world and through research and the possibility of observing and analyzing and imagining, where we go next and how we respond to some of life's challenges. And there might be some surfing as well. I'll give you that. John, what
Well,
are you
that's-
working on now? I mean,
that-
this season, do you have predictions?
on the season?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm covering the Giants and the A's down here, and if the Giants get to 500, that would I think that they haven't done that in 4 years, so that would be a step up. The A's are going all out to win a division, but it's so hard to bet against the Dodgers. They're so well-rounded. There hasn't been a team to repeat World Series titles since the Yankees at the turn of the century. And in the National League, what's the last team? Maybe the Big Red Machine in the 70s. It's just not done. But and yeah, it was a shortened season, but it's legit. They're going to get rings and they're going to get a trophy. But I don't see teams beyond the Dodgers, and I know how much the Padres upgraded and threw all kinds of money at that rotation. And Tatis Jr. is just a wonderful ball player, and Machado over at third, but they still haven't done it. And until you got to beat the best to be the best and all that. And right now the Dodgers are the best. So the Padres have a lot to prove. And I would love to see a National League championship series with those two teams. We've seen plenty of the Yankees and Red Sox over the years. By the way, we've never seen Giants Dodgers in an NLCS. It never happened. For whatever reason, it's always one team is good, the other team is down, vice versa. But I'd love to see Padres try to take down the Dodgers in the NLCS this year.
Well, there was the 62 playoffs. Dodgers.
No, that's wrong. They weren't playoffs. They were regular season games. 51 as well. 51 and 62. The Giants.
No. Yeah, I know that, but they were similar to they were a 3-game playoff.
It was the best of 3,
Yeah.
and it was games 163, 4 and 5.
Right.
And but yeah, and then back in New York they did the same in 51 when Thompson hit his home run with Pafko at the wall and Arnold Hanno in the bleachers.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, I want to thank you again. It was just a marvelous time talking to you both. And I just want to show the books again for people to get. This is The Cactus League by Emily Nemens, and 24 by John Shea and Willie Mays, great Willie Mays. So again, thank you both. I really appreciate it. And good luck with the future endeavors. And when the world gets straight again, hopefully you could get out here and we could do a proper book signing.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank
Emily.
you.
Sure.
Great to meet you.
Thanks so much. All right, we're off Facebook now, so thanks everybody. That was great.
Thank you, Patrick.
And, yeah, and we'll be putting it up. It'll live on our Facebook page and also on YouTube. I'll go ahead and put it up there. And also we convert the audio only portion into a podcast, and those have done really well for us. So
Great.
getting it from all different angles. So
So
surfing, Emily, now you're talking.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Take care. Yeah, Emily, I was just going to ask about the surfing part.
Oh yeah.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, I mean, William Finnegan's book
Oh yeah,
is just
Barbarian Days.
the perfect book. I probably have to read it like 7 more times because I don't surf. But I just, yeah, I mean, it's not as good as baseball for literature, but I think surfing, writing, is pretty interesting, and there's a lot of dramatic potential in a big wave, right?
There's some good, some good surfing novels I could recommend to you. If
Please.
if you're not aware. One of them is, it's called Tapping the Source. And it's
Mhm.
by an author named Kim Nunn. And it's kind of the quintessential hard-boiled detective novel meets surfing in the late 70s in California.
Mhm.
Really good book. There's another one called The Dawn Patrol
Yeah,
by
I've heard of that one.
Don Winslow. Yeah, that's a good one. There are a couple of other good ones too. Dogs of Winter, also by Kim Nunn. Those are really interesting. But
Yeah.
that whole subculture and almost, spiritual, the way, those surfers live their lives, it's kind of attractive and appealing, isn't it?
It is, and like I said, I'm writing about the contemporary art world in New York, which is a little bit the opposite of that. But I think I'm maybe manufacturing, but maybe not.
Well, that's exciting. My 18-year-old daughter surfs a lot.
Oh, she
So
does.
I know what to buy her once it comes out. Yeah.
It'll be a little while yet. Yeah, I mean, there's good waves near you, right? And not the big ones, but good consistent surfing out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. She learned on her own and she goes out there regularly. And yeah, she just really digs it. I went to San Diego State and had a surfing class in college. And I got two units for it, but it did me no good. She's really good.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap it up here, but thanks again, everybody.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.